Hello and welcome. A major breakthrough is how American officials describe their meetings with the leaders of Afghanistan and Pakistan. But as the Taliban pushes on with its offensive, just what was achieved in today's trilateral summit? US President Barack Obama met with Pakistani President Asif Ali Zardari and Afghan President Hamid Karzai. Islamabad is seeking a massive US aid package to better equip its military and boost development. But the American Congress is skeptical that Pakistan is doing all it can to fight the Taliban. Many analysts think Karzai and Zardari both head weak governments and cannot always fulfill Washington's wishes. So today we ask, can America, Afghanistan and Pakistan stop a takeover by the Taliban? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. We also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me today are Rehan Salam, an associate editor at The Atlantic magazine and a research fellow at the New America Foundation, and Haider Mullik, who focuses on US-Pakistan relations at the US Joint Special Operations University. But before we get to our guests, let's listen to what President Obama had to say after his trilateral meeting with his Afghani and Pakistani counterparts.
The road ahead will be difficult. There will be more violence and there will be setbacks. But let me be clear. The United States has made a lasting commitment to defeat al-Qaeda, but also to support the democratically elected sovereign governments of both Pakistan and Afghanistan. That commitment will not waver, and that support will be sustained.
Now let's get the latest on the summit from our senior Washington correspondent, Rob Reynolds. Rob, President Obama there speaking at the end of what has been a very intense day of diplomacy here in Washington. What's been going on?
Well, indeed, it has been a pretty intense day of diplomacy, Anand. First, the two presidents visiting, President Karzai and President Zardari, went to the State Department where they had sessions with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. They then made some statements to the media. During that time, Secretary Clinton expressed deep regret over the civilian casualties that were inflicted apparently as the result of a U.S.-led air raid in a Pakistani village. Then the two presidents went over to the White House where they met with the third president, President Obama, and we just heard a bit of what he told the press after that meeting. Now, these meetings are not the first time that high-level meetings have taken place, but it is the first time that it's happened here in Washington on such a sort of high-profile scale. Now, Obama stressed a couple of different themes. One was that the three countries are linked together. They have common goals. They have a common enemy, which he singled out al-Qaeda and the Taliban as that common enemy. Another theme that Obama made very clear was that this effort by the United States to shore up Afghanistan and Pakistani democracy would not only be done through military means, but through an unprecedented amount of civilian cooperation as well. He cited things like cooperation in intelligence, in commerce, in agriculture, all this sort of thing. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a long time. You saw Obama there saying that the United States has made a long-term commitment. He didn't say how long, and that is a question I think that many Americans will be asking. How long will this war, which many are now calling Obama's war, go on? How many Americans will become involved? How many billions will be spent? And what, at the end of the day, will be accomplished?
Rob, as you pointed out, this could not have come at a worse time for the United States because, as you reported, there was that attack in Afghanistan with many civilians being killed. Has there been any response from the U.S. side to that?
Well, yes. Secretary Clinton expressed very deep regret. She repeated that several times. Then the Afghan President Hamid Karzai said he appreciated those expressions of regret. There was no apology per se, Anand, but expressions of deep regret. And then we heard President Obama a short while ago saying the United States is always going to try to avoid civilian casualties. One of the things that we've been hearing from the military strategists and tacticians is that when the United States has larger numbers of troops on the ground, they will be able to cover larger areas, have perhaps better intelligence on the ground, and then will not be forced to rely so much on air power, which, as we've seen today, can be somewhat indiscriminate. That at least is the hope. Well, it remains to be seen whether that's going to turn out to be the reality.
Rob, we've often heard administration officials talk about Pakistan and Afghanistan as being the #1 foreign policy priority. So at the end of these meetings, what would President Obama hoped to have got from these two other men?
I think he's hoped to have gotten and has received their assurances that they are with him on this program. They get it, especially Zardari, saying that he's now convinced that the Taliban, that Al-Qaeda, that extremists within his country are like a cancer in the region. It has to be cut out. He is backing that up with some action, as we've seen the military, the Pakistani military is moving in the Swat Valley on the offensive against Taliban forces there. The question is whether that will be followed through to the satisfaction of the Americans. But they've got that from him, and I think that he's got as well from Karzai some similar representations. The United States would really like Karzai to take some serious efforts against corruption, which is very widespread and is a big problem in Afghanistan, and as well to extend sort of the writ, the authority of the central government beyond just the city of Kabul. And they would like, Obama would like Zardari to do the same as well, because there are areas in Pakistan that suffer from an almost total lack of government presence, no services on the ground, education, health care, judiciary, this sort of thing. And so he's, again, pledging a lot of money and a lot of U.S. effort on a number of different levels to try and make that happen for the Pakistanis and the Afghans.
Okay, Rob, thanks. Rob Reynolds there at the White House. Now, let's get to our guests in the studio. Welcome to both of you. Hadi Muluk, let me start with you. This was a three-way meeting. The United States, Afghanistan and Pakistan at the table there. Now, the Obama administration has always said that it looks at Afghanistan and Pakistan as one problem, and in some sense, it differs in that respect from the previous Bush administration, which saw them as two separate problems. But what is the connection here between Afghanistan and Pakistan? Make that connection for us.
The countries are obviously neighbors, and the border is very porous. It was designed by the British many, many years ago. You have a Pashtun population on both sides that has very strong tribal links, very strong cultural links, generally speaking. Now, specifically to the insurgency, there are links, alliances between the Afghan Taliban in Afghanistan's southeast and Pakistani Taliban in Pakistan's northwest. So you have alliances of that sort. You have a very porous border, and so it makes sense to, in that way, to look at both of them together. However, both countries are also very different, socioeconomically, infrastructure-wise, military-wise. Leaps difference between both of them, and in that respect, I think both Afghans and Pakistanis feel that they should be treated differently.
Rehan Salam, we looked at President Obama talking over there, and he sounded very much like he was adopting a carrot and stick approach there, saying, look, we're going to increase the amount of military that's going to be in Afghanistan. We're going to get tough in that area. But at the same time, he said they're going to be having, these two leaders are going to be having a lot of meetings in Washington to foster development in those two countries.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of anxiety, particularly in Pakistan, about the nature of the partnership between these two countries. I think that there's a lot of distrust and misunderstanding, and I think the idea of deepening the economic partnership, a number of Americans have proposed providing Pakistan with as much aid as we provide to Egypt, for example, so that there's a sense that this relationship goes beyond this narrow strategic question. Another related problem is that, frankly, very few Americans understand the nature of the challenge faced by the Pakistanis. For example, the Pakistani military has a very different perspective on the issue from the Pakistani civilian leadership. There's a sense that the Pakistani military sees itself as very deeply tied to the state, and that the civilian leadership may come and go, but they're the ones who actually are the guarantors of Pakistan's stability as a state. And so they tend to be more inclined to compromise with elements within the Pakistani Taliban, whom they see as actually very deeply embedded within that 15% of the country that is Pashtun. And so, they understand that dislodging this group is not dislodging a foreign force, but rather dislodging a force that is, in many respects deeply tied to the traditions. And that's, again, something that offends many of the people in the Pakistani civilian elite who are more metropolitan.
It's a force that they've cultivated, haven't they?
That's absolutely right. It's a very kind of tricky situation, and so, kind of they tend to think, well, we can have some control over them, we can exercise some control. Yet, of course, many folks within the Pakistani Taliban have a different agenda. They feel that they can destabilize the civilian leadership and actually, also kind of aid their allies in Afghanistan in a way that is going to undermine the Pakistani government.
Hadi Malik, you recently wrote an article in Newsweek magazine, I think it's in this week's magazine, in which you say, although the administration here says this is a very troubling situation, it's our number one concern, but you say the situation is not as dire as it seems.
Yes. I was in the northern Fada and the Swat Valley recently, and I talked to senior Pakistani military officials, intelligence, mostly off the record, and I got a very different feeling when I was talking to people who were involved in the recent Swat Valley deal, where many Americans feel that the Pakistani state capitulated. When I went to northern Fada, Bajor and Mohmand agencies, I saw the opposite. I actually saw the rate of the government being increased through the Frontier Corps, which is part of the Pakistani military.
This was in the Bajor area.
In the Bajor area. Yeah. In the Bajor area, the Taliban were capitulating. The morale was very high of the Pakistani military. They have a very innovative new general there, General Tariq Khan. He's trying out a different model of counterinsurgency for the longest time, for 7.5 years. They have kind of followed the out-terrorizing the terrorists, search and destroy, finally, slowly, but finally moving towards clear, hold and build. That means that close to 200,000 IDPs, internally displaced people, were actually brought back after successful clearing in Bajor and then holding operation, working with the civilians in a way that they never did before. So you have greater morale, you have better civil military support, and you are negotiated from a position of strength. Now that model is new, but it's an experiment that's working. And some of the Bajor veterans have recently been moved into Lower Dir and now walking into Swat as we speak.
So they want to expand
yes.
the strategy. I want to take a call now from one of our viewers. Mohammed in Georgia, go ahead with your question.
Thanks for taking my call. I just feel that what President Obama is doing at this point is really a waste of money. I don't see how this war can be won. The Soviet Union tried it for several years. They end up pulling out. I think the sooner we negotiate with the moderate Taliban and the Northern Alliance, the better, and we can save ourselves a ton of money and pull out and come back to the United States of America.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Let me put that question to Rehan Salam. Throwing money at the problem is not going to solve it, the caller says.
Well, I think that the question is what happens if the Afghan state collapses or if the Pakistani state collapses. I think that then we'd actually have to go back in. It would be far more costly. So I think the idea of taking these prophylactic measures, trying to build on what we have, trying to build on some of the successes that have been achieved makes a lot more sense and will in fact prove less costly over time.
Okay, we are going to have to take a short break right now. More of our discussion in a moment. Stay with us.